December 25th. The Day of Peace. The Day of Goodwill. The day when warfare supposedly stops and humanity remembers its better nature. The day when enemies pause and mothers rest, and the machinery of violence temporarily ceases. Except it doesn't. December 25th has witnessed some of history's most brutal massacres precisely because Christmas was supposed to represent safety and celebration and the temporary suspension of horror. When Christmas becomes a weapon, when the one day that promises peace is deliberately chosen for maximum violence, something breaks in the human psyche that can never be completely repaired. This is the story of multiple Christmas days across centuries when that sacred day of celebration became the perfect moment for calculated massacre. When military leaders deliberately chose December 25th to attack because enemies would be celebrating rather than defending. When civilian populations gathered for Christmas festivities became concentrated targets for mass murder. When the psychological impact of Christmas violence multiplied the trauma exponentially because it violated the one day that was supposed to be safe. The Christmas massacres changed how humans understand the possibility of sanctuary and the limits of human cruelty, and whether any day can truly be considered sacred when warfare and hatred remain possible. Before we explore the specific massacres that transformed Christmas from celebration into nightmare across different centuries and continents, comment where you're watching from and what Christmas means to you personally. Because understanding how Christmas functions as psychological sanctuary makes comprehending Christmas massacres more devastating. Christmas represents temporary peace in cultures influenced by Christian tradition. Christmas promises that at least one day annually, humanity can pause the violence and remember shared connections. A Christmas creates psychological space where vulnerability becomes acceptable because the day itself offers protection. The Christmas massacres demonstrate that this psychological sanctuary was always illusion. That vulnerability during Christmas made populations easier targets. That the promise of peace on December 25th created opportunities for those willing to violate that promise. Comment your location. Tell me whether you think Christmas truce should be mandatory in warfare. Tell me whether violating Christmas peace is somehow worse than violence on any other day, or whether all violence is equally horrific regardless of date. Let's debate whether Christmas sanctity is meaningful or just comforting mythology we tell ourselves. December 25th. 1914. The Western Front. The Christmas truce had just occurred. British and German soldiers had crossed no man's land, had shaken hands, had recognized each other's humanity, had proven that warfare wasn't inevitable and soldiers could choose peace. That truce had terrified military leadership. By Christmas 1915, explicit orders forbade any repetition. Artillery bombardments were scheduled specifically for Christmas Day to prevent soldiers from developing psychological space to recognize enemies as human. The Christmas of 1915 witnessed deliberate military violence designed specifically to crush the possibility of peace that 1914 had revealed. Not a massacre in the traditional sense of attacking defenseless civilians, but a calculated use of Christmas as a weapon against soldiers who might otherwise choose not to fight. The bombardments killed hundreds on both sides. Soldiers who might have been singing carols were instead dying from artillery shells deliberately scheduled for maximum psychological impact. The Christmas truce of 1914 had demonstrated that soldiers would choose peace if permitted. The Christmas bombardments of 1915 demonstrated that military leadership would use violence to prevent that choice. The psychological message was clear. Christmas offers no sanctuary. Peace isn't possible. The machinery of war continues regardless of date or holiday or supposed sacredness. December 25th, 2008. Covina, California. 25 people gathered for Christmas Eve party that extended past midnight into Christmas Day. Extended family celebration with children and adults and the warmth of holiday tradition. Bruce Jeffrey Pardo arrived at 11:30 p.m. on December 24th, dressed in Santa Claus costume. He knocked on the door carrying what appeared to be wrapped Christmas present. When his 8-year-old niece opened the door expecting Santa bringing gifts, Pardo shot her in the face. Then he opened fire on the party with multiple semi-automatic handguns. Then he unwrapped the present, which contained a homemade flamethrower, a modified air compressor designed to spray racing fuel. He used it to set the house on fire while family members tried to escape. 9 people died. Some from gunfire. Some from burns as the house became inferno. The child who opened the door survived with severe facial injuries. Pardo had finalized his divorce 1 week earlier. His ex-wife was at the party. He specifically chose Christmas because he knew the family would be gathered together in one location. He weaponized Christmas. He turned the holiday that promised safety and joy into massacre. He violated the psychological sanctuary that Christmas represents. And he did it while dressed as Santa Claus, transforming the symbol of gift-giving and childhood wonder into instrument of terror. Pardo fled the scene and committed suicide hours later at his brother's house. He left behind survivors who would forever associate Christmas with trauma. Children who watched Santa murder their family. Parents who lost children on the day that was supposed to celebrate family bonds. The psychological damage extended far beyond the immediate victims. The Covina massacre changed how an entire community understood Christmas. How children processed Santa Claus imagery. How families approached holiday gatherings that suddenly seemed vulnerable rather than safe. The massacre demonstrated that Christmas sanctuary was illusion. That violence could intrude into the most sacred family moments. That the holiday which promised peace could become weapon of maximum psychological destruction. December 24th to 25th, 2008. Same Christmas. Different continent. Northern Democratic Republic of Congo. The Lord's Resistance Army had been terrorizing Central Africa for decades. Led by Joseph Kony, the LRA specialized in kidnapping children to force them into combat and sexual slavery. They had been partially contained in Uganda, but had scattered into Congo after joint military operations disrupted their bases. By Christmas 2008, they had dispersed into multiple groups, each targeting Congolese villages. The LRA deliberately waited until Christmas Day, when villagers gathered for celebrations. When maximum numbers of people would be concentrated in village centers. When communities would be celebrating rather than defending. The LRA attacked multiple villages simultaneously on December 24th and 25th, 2008. They used machetes and clubs rather than guns to kill more quietly and prevent nearby villages from being alerted. They crushed skulls with wooden bats. They hacked victims to death with axes. They deliberately targeted gathered crowds to maximize death tolls. In Batan village, they killed 26 people while survivors watched from hiding. In Faraj, they surrounded people attending a Christmas concert and massacred them systematically. In Mabando, they played radio loudly and forced victims to sing songs to attract more people before killing everyone who gathered. The tactics were calculated psychological warfare. Use Christmas to concentrate victims. Use Christmas celebration to lower defenses. Use Christmas as weapon to maximize trauma for survivors who would forever associate holiday with horror. Over the Christmas period between December 24th and December 27th, 2008, the LRA killed at least 865 civilians confirmed through Human Rights Watch investigation. They abducted at least 160 children to force them into LRA ranks. They raped at least 80 women documented, though actual numbers likely higher. The Christmas massacres were calculated terror designed to demonstrate that no day offered sanctuary, that celebration created vulnerability, that gathering for Christmas made communities easier targets. Survivors described the psychological impact. They had been celebrating Christmas in their villages. They had been singing and feasting and gathering together for the one day annually when joy seemed possible despite poverty and instability and the ongoing violence that characterized the region. Then the LRA arrived and Christmas became massacre. The trauma wasn't just physical death. It was the psychological destruction of the one day that had seemed safe. Of the one holiday that had represented hope and community and temporary peace. The LRA deliberately weaponized that hope. They turned Christmas into trap. They demonstrated that sanctuary was illusion and celebration created vulnerability and trust made communities easier to destroy. August 23, 1914. Dinant, Belgium. Not December 25th, but relevant to understanding Christmas as weapon because the Dinant massacre established patterns that would be repeated in Christmas violence. German troops invaded Belgium in August 1914 as part of the Schlieffen Plan to attack France through neutral territory. Belgian resistance was fiercer than anticipated. German military doctrine responded by declaring that civilian resistance justified collective punishment of entire communities. The doctrine assumed that Belgian civilians were hiding franctireurs, irregular combatants, and therefore civilian populations were legitimate military targets. German troops entered Dinant on August 23, 1914, convinced that civilians had fired on them despite evidence suggesting German units may have fired on each other in confusion. German soldiers gathered civilians in the town square. They separated men and boys from women and children. They executed 674 civilians by firing squad. Some killed in the square. Some killed in their homes. Some killed while fleeing. The Dinant massacre wasn't a Christmas massacre, but it established psychological precedent for using civilian gatherings as opportunities for mass killing, for weaponizing moments when communities gathered together, for turning celebration and gathering into massacre. The patterns established at Dinant would be repeated in Christmas massacres across the next century. The principle was consistent. Concentrated civilians are easier to kill. Celebrations create concentration. Therefore, celebrations become tactical opportunities for mass murder. The psychological impact multiplies because destroying communities during moments of joy creates trauma that poisons future celebrations forever. December 25, 1776. Trenton, New Jersey. George Washington's crossing of the Delaware River. Not a massacre in the traditional sense of murdering defenseless civilians, but a calculated attack on Christmas Day precisely because enemies would be celebrating rather than defending. British forces and their Hessian mercenaries were quartered in Trenton for winter. Christmas Day 1776 featured celebrations, drinking, and the assumption that warfare had paused for the holiday. Washington recognized this assumption created vulnerability. He ordered 2,400 Continental soldiers to cross the frozen Delaware River on Christmas night. They spent 12 hours crossing in brutal cold. Then they marched to Trenton and attacked on the morning of December 26th. Hessian forces were surprised, disorganized, many still drunk or hungover from Christmas celebrations. The attack killed 22 Hessian soldiers, wounded 83, and captured approximately 900. American forces lost 0 soldiers in combat, though 2 died of exposure during the river crossing. Washington's Christmas attack wasn't a massacre, but it weaponized Christmas. It exploited the assumption that December 25th offered sanctuary from warfare. It demonstrated that celebrations created vulnerability that tactical commanders could exploit. The Battle of Trenton became celebrated in American history as brilliant military strategy. Rarely discussed is the psychological principle it established. That Christmas creates tactical opportunity. That enemies celebrating are easier to kill. That the promise of holiday peace makes populations vulnerable to those willing to violate that promise. Washington's attack succeeded precisely because it violated expectations about Christmas sanctuary. Because it turned a day of celebration into a weapon of war. December 25, 1868. Not a massacre, but Andrew Johnson's Christmas pardon of all Confederate soldiers who had participated in the Civil War. Included in that pardon were soldiers and officers who had participated in massacres during the war. The Christmas pardon weaponized the holiday not through violence, but through erasure of accountability for violence. Johnson deliberately chose Christmas Day for maximum symbolic impact. Christmas as day of mercy and forgiveness and new beginnings. Christmas as opportunity to declare the war ended and reconciliation possible. But the Christmas pardon meant that Confederate soldiers who had massacred Black Union troops at Fort Pillow and elsewhere faced no consequences. It meant that Christmas became associated not with justice, but with impunity. It weaponized Christmas by using the holiday's symbolism of forgiveness to prevent accountability for war crimes. The psychological impact for survivors of Confederate massacres was devastating. Their trauma was dismissed. Their dead were dishonored. And it happened on Christmas specifically because Christmas symbolism provided moral cover for pardons that would have been controversial on any other day. The Christmas pardon of 1868 demonstrated another way Christmas becomes weapon. Not through massacre, but through using Christmas symbolism to enable future violence by preventing consequences for past violence. December 25, 1929. Less documented but Lawson family massacre in North Carolina, where Father Charles Lawson murdered his wife and 6 of his 7 children on Christmas Day, then committed suicide. Family had gathered for Christmas celebration, had taken family photographs that morning. Then Lawson systematically shot his family members. The massacre wasn't political or military, but domestic violence that weaponized Christmas, that used the family gathering and holiday celebration as opportunity for annihilation, that destroyed the psychological sanctuary of family Christmas permanently for the surviving daughter and extended family and the entire community that had to process how Christmas morning family photos transitioned into mass murder within hours. The Lawson Massacre became part of North Carolina folklore, a story told and retold about how Christmas can become nightmare, about how family gatherings create vulnerability, about how the holiday that promises safety and joy can be weaponized by those willing to violate every norm of human decency. December 25, 1922. San Salvador, El Salvador. Christmas Day Massacre, when government security forces and paramilitary Red League opened fire on crowds supporting opposition presidential candidate Miguel Tomás Molina. The crowd included large contingent of women belonging to Constitutional Party's Feminine Committee who hoped Molina would grant universal suffrage. The government banned political rallies, but Molina held rally anyway on Christmas afternoon. Approximately 100 Red League paramilitaries plus Army cavalry, National Guard, and National Police attacked the crowd. They fired indiscriminately into crowd that included women, children, and non-combatant supporters. The massacre resulted in dozens of deaths, confirmed though exact numbers disputed, and over 100 injuries. The El Salvador Christmas Massacre weaponized the holiday by exploiting the assumption that Christmas Day provided sanctuary from political violence. The organizers held the rally on Christmas specifically because they believed the government wouldn't attack on that day. The government attacked specifically to demonstrate that no day offered sanctuary for opposition movements, that Christmas provided no protection, that political resistance would be crushed regardless of date or holiday or public opinion about attacking crowds on the Day of Peace. The psychological message was clear. No holiday is sacred. No day provides sanctuary. Resistance will be met with violence regardless of whether that violence violates every norm about Christmas peace. Now here's my question for you, and think carefully before answering in comments. If you were military or political leader facing enemy celebration or opposition gathering on Christmas Day, would you order attack? Would you exploit the vulnerability that celebration creates? Or would you respect Christmas as sacred day exempt from warfare regardless of tactical advantage? Your answer reveals something important about how you balance military effectiveness against cultural norms and whether winning matters more than preserving some boundaries around acceptable violence. Comment below because this question gets to the heart of why Christmas massacres keep happening. Because some leaders prioritize tactical advantage over sacred days. Because some leaders recognize that violating Christmas taboo multiplies psychological impact of violence. Because Christmas becomes weapon precisely because it's supposed to be exempt from warfare. The patterns across Christmas massacres reveal consistent psychological principles. First, Christmas concentrates populations. Families gather. Communities celebrate together. This concentration creates tactical opportunity for mass killing. Second, Christmas lowers defenses. People celebrate rather than maintaining vigilance. Guards drink. Sentries relax. Populations assume the holiday provides sanctuary. This lower defense creates vulnerability that attackers exploit. Third, Christmas multiplies trauma. Violence on any day is horrific. Violence on Christmas destroys the psychological sanctuary that the holiday represents. Survivors can never celebrate Christmas without remembering massacre. Children can't experience Santa Claus without trauma. Families can't gather without fear. The psychological damage extends across lifetimes and generations because Christmas is annual. Every December 25th becomes re-traumatization as survivors are forced to confront what happened on the day that was supposed to represent safety and joy. Fourth, Christmas massacres send messages beyond immediate victims. They demonstrate to entire populations that no day is safe. That sanctuary is illusion. That gathering creates vulnerability rather than strength. That hope and celebration and trust make communities easier targets. The Christmas massacres function as terrorism. They create fear that extends far beyond people directly affected. They poison an entire cultural holiday for anyone who learns about the massacre. They demonstrate that those who perpetrate Christmas violence are willing to violate the most sacred cultural norms and therefore are capable of anything. Fifth, Christmas massacres weaponize cultural symbolism. Christian cultures teach that Christmas represents peace and goodwill and divine protection. Attacking on Christmas violates those teachings and forces survivors to confront that their faith offered no protection. That God didn't prevent massacre on his son's birthday. That the promise of Christmas peace was mythology that disappeared when violence arrived. For survivors with religious faith, this creates theological crisis that compounds trauma. For communities defined by Christian tradition, Christmas massacres force confrontation with the fact that cultural holidays provide no actual sanctuary, regardless of how sacred they seem. The history of Christmas massacres demonstrates that those willing to violate taboos gain tactical and psychological advantages that incentivize future violations. Washington's Christmas attack on Trenton succeeded precisely because it exploited holiday vulnerability. The LRA Christmas massacres in Congo terrorized populations more effectively than non-Christmas violence would have because they demonstrated no day was safe. Pardo's Covina massacre multiplied his personal revenge by weaponizing the family Christmas gathering. Each Christmas massacre proves to future perpetrators that violating Christmas increases impact of violence, that the psychological damage multiplies, that victims suffer not just from violence itself, but from violation of the one day that promised sanctuary. And therefore Christmas becomes tactical opportunity for those unconstrained by moral taboos against holiday violence. What happens after Christmas massacres? How do survivors process violence that destroyed their sacred holiday? The evidence comes from multiple sources. First, many survivors stop celebrating Christmas. The holiday becomes re-traumatization rather than celebration. Families abandon Christmas traditions because they trigger trauma memories. Children who survived Christmas massacres grow into adults who refuse to observe the holiday because it represents horror rather than joy. Second, some survivors transform Christmas into memorial. They use December 25th to commemorate victims rather than celebrate holiday. They establish annual rituals of remembrance that acknowledge what happened while attempting to reclaim the day from massacre. Third, some survivors overinvest in Christmas celebration. They insist on elaborate traditions and force joy as defense against trauma. They weaponize Christmas celebration itself as resistance against those who tried to destroy the holiday through violence. The psychological compulsion to celebrate becomes armor against acknowledging how thoroughly the massacre damaged their relationship with Christmas. Fourth, Christmas massacres create intergenerational trauma. Children of survivors inherit anxiety about holiday gatherings. Grandchildren who never experienced the massacre themselves nevertheless grow up in families where Christmas triggers visible distress in older generations. The trauma transmits across generations through family dynamics that make Christmas a source of tension rather than celebration. The psychological damage doesn't end when survivors die. It persists through family patterns and cultural memory and community stories that preserve awareness of what happened when Christmas became weapon. Fifth, Christmas massacres change how entire cultures understand the holiday. After enough Christmas violence, populations begin treating December 25th as potentially dangerous rather than guaranteed safe. Security increases at Christmas gatherings. Vigilance replaces trust. The naive assumption that Christmas offers sanctuary disappears from cultural consciousness and gets replaced by awareness that celebration creates vulnerability. Christmas stops being purely celebration and becomes also a reminder of human capacity for violating every sacred norm when violence serves tactical or personal purposes. One final question before we finish this exploration of when Christmas became weapon and peace became illusion and sanctuary proved to be mythology rather than reality. Comment, weapon, if you made it through this entire video about Christmas massacres without clicking away. And tell me whether you think Christmas should be legally protected day exempt from warfare, or whether that's naive idealism that creates vulnerability. Comment which historical Christmas massacre you think deserves deeper exploration. The 2008 LRA Congo massacres? The Covina family killing? The military uses of Christmas from Washington's Trenton attack to World War I bombardments? The domestic Christmas murders like the Lawson family? Comment the massacre plus weapon so I can count requests. Let's crowdsource which Christmas tragedy needs detailed examination. The lesson from Christmas massacres is this. Sanctuary is constructed, not inherent. Christmas offers no actual protection beyond collective agreement to respect the holiday. When that agreement breaks down, when individuals or militaries decide tactical advantage matters more than sacred days, Christmas becomes weapon precisely because it was supposed to be safe. The concentration of populations, the lowering of defenses, the psychological symbolism of peace, all these factors that make Christmas sacred also make Christmas tactical opportunity for those willing to violate taboo. The history of Christmas massacres demonstrates that humans keep learning this lesson and keep forgetting it and keep being surprised when Christmas becomes weapon again. We want to believe that some days are sacred, that Christmas offers genuine sanctuary, that the holiday spirit provides actual protection rather than just comforting illusion. But the massacres prove otherwise. They prove that Christmas sanctuary depends on collective choice to respect boundaries around violence. That when that choice breaks down, Christmas becomes one more day when violence occurs. That the symbolism of peace doesn't prevent warfare. That gathering to celebrate creates vulnerability that tactical minds exploit. That hope and joy and trust make populations easier targets for those unconstrained by moral limits. The Christmas massacres changed how we understand the relationship between cultural holidays and violence. Before systematic Christmas attacks, populations assumed sacred days provided sanctuary. After repeated Christmas massacres across centuries and continents, that assumption became harder to maintain. Modern Christmas security reflects awareness that celebration creates vulnerability. Police presence at Christmas markets. Security screenings at Christmas gatherings. Vigilance during holiday celebrations. All reflect knowledge that Christmas offers no inherent protection. That sanctuary must be actively defended because it won't defend itself. That the promise of Christmas peace is aspiration, not guarantee, and requires collective commitment to maintain. What would happen if Christmas massacre stopped? If collective agreement emerged that December 25th was genuinely exempt from violence regardless of tactical advantage or personal vendetta or political opportunity, would that agreement hold? Could it hold? Or would the first defector who violated Christmas taboo gain such enormous tactical and psychological advantage that the agreement would collapse immediately? The history suggests pessimistic answer. Christmas massacres keep happening because they work. They concentrate victims. They multiply trauma. They demonstrate power by violating sacred norms. They terrorize populations by destroying assumption of sanctuary. Until those tactical and psychological advantages disappear, Christmas will continue being weaponized by those willing to violate cultural taboos for military, political, or personal purposes. The victims of Christmas massacres deserve more than being forgotten as historical footnotes. The 674 civilians massacred at Dinant in August 1914 deserve recognition, though their massacre wasn't on December 25th. The 9 family members killed in Covina on Christmas 2008 deserve remembrance. The 865 Congolese civilians massacred by the LRA over Christmas 2008 deserve acknowledgement. The dozens killed in El Salvador Christmas Massacre 1922 deserve commemoration. All those who died because Christmas was weaponized against them deserve recognition that their deaths weren't random but resulted from calculated decisions to exploit holiday vulnerability for maximum impact. The survivors of Christmas massacres carry trauma that most people can't comprehend. They survived violence that destroyed their sacred holiday. They watched family members die during celebrations that promise safety. They experienced Christmas as weapon rather than sanctuary. And they live every subsequent December 25th knowing that the holiday, which promises peace, brought them horror. Their trauma deserves recognition. Their courage to continue living despite Christmas being permanently poisoned deserves acknowledgement. Their choices about whether to observe Christmas or abandon it or transform it deserve respect regardless of which choice they make. The communities affected by Christmas massacres suffer damage beyond individual victims. They lose collective sense of sanctuary. They lose naive trust that holidays provide protection. They gain awareness that celebration creates vulnerability and gathering enables mass casualty attacks. This awareness changes community dynamics permanently. It makes every Christmas gathering slightly anxious, every family celebration slightly fearful, every holiday tradition shadowed by knowledge of what happened when Christmas became weapon. The broader lesson for humanity is that sanctuary requires active maintenance, that sacred days don't protect themselves, that collective agreements to respect boundaries around violence remain fragile and contingent, that hoping Christmas will be peaceful is insufficient without commitment to making it peaceful, that every Christmas massacre that goes unchallenged makes future Christmas massacres more likely because it demonstrates the tactic works and violating taboos increases impact without increasing costs. Christmas as weapon. Christmas as tactical opportunity. Christmas as trap for celebrating populations. Christmas as multiplier of trauma through violation of sacred day. This is what happens when sanctuary becomes illusion, when peace becomes mythology, when the promise of safe holiday disappears under weight of repeated violations. The Christmas massacres reveal uncomfortable truth about human nature and warfare and the limits of cultural norms when violence becomes tactical necessity or personal compulsion or political expedience. December 25th arrives annually. Each year presents choice. Respect Christmas as sacred day exempt from violence, or weaponize Christmas to exploit vulnerability that celebration creates. The history suggests that choice keeps being made both ways. Some humans maintain respect for Christmas sanctuary, others exploit it. And the exploitation multiplies trauma precisely because it violates the one day that promised peace. That pattern seems likely to continue until either all humans commit to respecting Christmas boundaries or we collectively abandon pretense that sacred days offer any protection beyond our willingness to defend them. The Christmas massacres teach that sanctuary is choice, not guarantee. That cultural holidays provide protection only when collectively defended. That symbolism of peace means nothing to those willing to violate norms for tactical advantage. That concentration of celebrating populations creates opportunity for mass violence. That hope and joy and trust make communities vulnerable. That December 25th is simultaneously the day that promises most peace and the day whose violation causes most trauma. Christmas as weapon. Christmas as nightmare. Christmas as proof that no day is truly safe when humans remain capable of violating every sacred norm in pursuit of violence.